All right, welcome back everybody to another SaberSim DFS Office Hours stream. Sorry, I thought maybe my mic was muted there for a second. It seemed like it wasn't getting any volume, but I think we are all set here. Happy Friday, everyone. It's another week down. I got the hair down today. It's a beautiful day outside. Looking forward to the weekend here. Thank you, everyone who tuned in yesterday for the NBA Showdown and Short Slate strategy session. We had a great audience, had some awesome discussion. We broke down NBA showdowns and small slate strategy for over an hour. We answered dozens of questions. I think it was really helpful. I applied some of the things that I learned on our stream yesterday from Max and Danny into my contest last night. Hope you guys did too. I hope that video is helpful for you. It is up on our YouTube channel. It is time-stamped. It's all nicely organized for you guys. Please check it out. If you're playing NBA showdowns and small slates here, it is an awesome video. There's a lot of strategy, a lot of interesting advice in that video. So I highly recommend checking that out. If this is your first time joining us for the DFS Office Hours stream, whether you are watching live here or you are watching the recording, welcome, first of all. And we're happy to have you. This is a live Q&A style stream where we answer questions about DFS, about SaberSim, about really whatever you guys want to talk about, live on stream here through questions that come in through our Slack channel and our YouTube chat and also our support inbox. So thank you for tuning in. This is live for a reason. We want clarifying questions. We want follow-up questions. So please, if there's something that I can do a better job explaining, please let me know. And I am happy to... Sorry, I keep feeling like I mute my mic. It's happened a couple times here now. If there's follow-up questions, please let me know. Happy to continue diving deep into some of these conversations. I want to make sure that you guys are feeling like you're getting your questions answered. So if you are interested in joining our Slack and you are a premium SaberSim subscriber and you don't have access yet, please email us at support@sabersim.com. I've noticed a few users have reached out to us, maybe didn't even know we had a Slack channel for our community. So we've got great discussion going on in the Slack every day. If you are part of the SaberSim community and are not yet in the Slack and want to get involved, email us support@sabersim.com and we will get you an invite link. And if you've been watching these streams and you are not a part of the SaberSim team at all, what are you doing? Get in here. We've got great conversation going on all day. We've got some great content coming out now. The product is always improving. So we've got a free 7-day trial. Please come check us out and get involved. Let's see. So other housekeeping items, we'll continue doing these every single day at 2 p.m. Eastern. We will be back here on Monday, of course, and then on Thursdays, this time slot will be continued to be reserved for strategy sessions, deep dives, right? So I'm not sure exactly what we are looking for next week. If there is a particular topic that you are interested in or would like us to dive deep into for more of one of those strategy session type formats, just let us know. We'll continue to kind of use the questions we're getting here in office hours to influence those. I know we've got a couple ideas floating around about maybe what might make a good strategy session for our next one, but those will continue to be Thursday, and we will just keep it rolling here. So first of all, I guess last thing I'll note, man, it is a wonderful time to be an NBA fan. Seriously, I don't know. The games have been amazing, and it is really just an exciting time to watch the NBA kind of changing. I was thinking this last night, and I won't get up on my soapbox for too long here, but watching some of these young stars do what they're doing is pretty cool. And I know the NBA is probably pulling their hair out watching big market team after big market team get eliminated here. But seeing these small market teams with some players that have been drafted by or been with the teams for a while really make it, like the Jazz and the Mavericks and the Nuggets, the Bucks too with Giannis. It's just pretty cool. So and it's been special to watch. It's always a good day of week for me when I can watch an LA team get eliminated. I know a lot of folks probably won't be happy to hear that. So we got it yesterday, might get another one tonight. But anyway, without much further ado, and without getting in trouble here for talking smack on the show here, I'm going to jump into some questions. Again, if you have questions, you're watching the show, ask me on YouTube chat. Ask me in our SaberSim Slack. We'll get to it. If there are follow-up questions, if I don't explain something well, just let me know. We'll jump back into questions. And if you watch the recording later and want to be a part of this and have some questions that you'd like to see answered on stream, email us support@sabersim.com. So All right, let's go ahead and get started here. So we had a question from Andrew come in early this morning on Slack. All right, cool. Andrew said, I'm the type of person that adjusts projections in the morning and makes my lineups later in the afternoon. I also understand projections change throughout the day as we get closer to lock. Let's say Boston is projected 4 runs and I bump them to 4-3. As Saber adjusts Boston's total, will it not adjust Boston since I made manual adjustments? Or if Saber changes Boston's base to 4.5, will it now show 4.8 since I made a 0.3 run adjustment? This is a great question. This actually sparked some discussion for the SaberSim guys here this morning. And I think, Andrew, you've really kind of come across a bit of a minor bug here, and I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. So we'll get SaberSim pulled up here, and all right, so we've got SaberSim up here, and basically, Andrew, I think what you said here is you pretty much nailed what actually is going to happen, but it is not what we intend to happen here. So I'll start here. First of all, if you guys ever edit a player projection by either editing their value over here, so say we update Scherzer to 26, or you use the upload data and either use the table or the CSV upload to upload a player projection, we are never going to overwrite that, even if we run other sims, right? That is just going to stay locked in. We won't touch it. That has been overridden. I believe in the background, if the player's range of outcomes and ceiling and things like that changes based on the sim, we will adjust that. But the player's actual overall projection that we're using that you've inputted, we're not ever going to touch. Now, the intention is that the same thing would happen here with the team totals. And what we realized, Andrew, here is that that's not actually the case. So what you described is exactly right. So let's just use an example. So let's say in the case of Boston, right, they're at 4.5 right now, and we're going to bump them up to 4.8. And we hit yes. And it's going to update the projections and so on. If we later run a sim and our baseline total for Boston jumps to 5.0, for example, this is now going to say 5.3, and it's still going to be highlighted in green, and it's still going to show you that you've made a change, but it is, yes, going to basically just take the 0.3 run adjustment that we've made and move it over to the new sim. That's not exactly what we intended here. This is something that we're probably going to have fixed in one of our next kind of major releases, coming along with a redesign overall to the app. So for now, it's kind of a good thing to note how this works. That said, so let's say this comes out later and we bump Boston's run total up a whole bunch and they're now at 5.3. The associated player projections that come alongside of that will also be adjusted correctly. So you're still going to make strong lineups. Everything's going to be working correctly, for lack of a better word. But it is an important thing to note that these can change. The team totals can change when future sims run. So just keep an eye on that. Make sure things are where you want them to be. And I know that that is not exactly the most intuitive thing, and that is because that is just a small minor bug there. So thank you for pointing that out, Andrew. Hopefully that helps explain it. Again, we'll have that fixed. The intended functionality here is that if you set this to 4.8, no matter what we simmed later, it would stay at 4.8, just the same way we think about player projections. But for now, what it is doing is it's capturing the change there and maintaining that. So you will always be 0.3 up compared to where SaberSim is. And for some users, that might actually be useful. I know I do things a similar way. Andrew, I go in and early in the morning, we'll make some adjustments, and it actually sometimes can be kind of nice to see how things have changed later in the day. But we definitely don't want this to confuse users, and I think it is a little confusing right now. So with all that said, hopefully that does answer your question. If it doesn't, please let me know. I'm happy to kind of walk back through that because I know it is a little confusing. So, all right, cool. I'm going to just keep us moving right along here, guys. We've got another question that came in through Slack this morning. This one is from Giant Cobra. And he asked, when setting global exposure, what's a good percent to set that would give me a wide variety of player pool just as if I were to use smart diversity? This is an interesting question. Giant Cobra, I assume you are talking about this max exposure item here. So I am going to answer this question through that lens. If you are referring to something else, not exactly sure what that might be, but please let me know. So really the question is like, what can I set this at to increase the variety, the diversity of my player pool? A few notes right off the bat. You said just as if I were to use smart diversity here in this question. I would very much emphasize that max exposure should never be taking the place of smart diversity. Smart diversity is going to really give you a lot of the upside that you're going to capture in your lineups that you really need for GPP. It's going to limit the total number of simulations that we're using to generate a player's projection when we build each lineup, right? So especially for baseball, it is just huge, right? If you look at a player like Mookie Betts, these projections just don't really mean that much when you're looking at a mean projection for a baseball player, because if we look, this range of outcomes is not normally distributed by using smart diversity to pick smaller buckets of our simulations to generate a player projection. We capture some of these ceiling outcomes. We introduce a lot of natural diversity into your lineups anyway. I would very much recommend not going below the default values on smart diversity for any GPP contest. So I'm going to start there. But with that said, max exposure can still be useful. And it's something that we don't talk about very often. I think some of our users don't always know exactly the best way to use it. So let's talk about ways that we can use this to get a little more diversity. So I think if you are an office hour regular here, either watching live or watching the recording, this conversation will seem somewhat familiar to you since we have talked about it before, but it is always good to reinforce this. So what max exposure is doing is it is going to limit the entire pool of lineups that we build for you. It's going to limit the exposure of any one player to whatever it's set at, right? So just to be clear, this is not the max exposure of your lineup pool. In other words, if I set this at 50 and I'm building 20 lineups, I may end up with more than 10 lineups of a certain player. I may end up with more than 50. We are probably, when you set this at 20, most of the time going to build you 500 lineups. What this is actually saying is we are not going to use any one player in more than 250 of them, okay? So how this can be used well, and how I often use this, is for sports that I know I'm going to be spreading out my exposure. I know that I'm going to have certain exposure limits. I may set this to a certain value to ensure that there is a general variety to my lineups by the way they are made just immediately. Because I know I'm going to be bringing down some of the exposures that I'm going to get naturally. So I find this very helpful in high variance sports, sports that you don't really typically find yourself wanting very high exposures. For me, those sports are things like baseball, where hitters, I'm often, especially if I'm building 150 lineups or something like that, or a lot of lineups, I don't want 80 different lineups committed to one single hitter, even in a great spot, just because of baseball hitting is so variant. Golf is another one. I often find myself capping my most exposed golfer somewhere between 30 and 40%. If I know that's the case, I will often go ahead and, excuse me, I lost my train of thought. I will set that max exposure at a certain value because I know that I'm going to be capping exposures anyway. So let's actually watch this play out in practice. So we'll do this for baseball here. Baseball is an interesting one because for batters, you may or may not be capping exposures, but I think batters are more likely. For pitchers, at least personally for me, I'm almost never capping exposures on pitchers because I'm totally fine being 100% on some of the best pitchers on the slate, like a guy like Scherzer or something tonight. So what I recommend is being gentle with your touch on max exposure to start until you get familiar. But a level I will typically think about is if I'm going to say that I only want let's say 30% max of a certain golfer, I might set this at something like 60%. And I know I'm still going to get the best pitchers when they actually make the lineups, even though I'm capping their exposure too. But this is going to generally kind of increase the diversity of my lineup. So let's go ahead and run this. First, I'm just going to change to projections here so that we can just avoid that DraftKings community guideline here. And let's run this. Haven't heard anything about my little jab at LA yet in the chat, so I must be doing okay here. That's good. All right, cool. So our build's done. Let's look at this. So again, we're talking about we built 500 lineups, right? Of these 500, we're not going to have any more than 300 lineups of a single player. And actually, we can demonstrate this, right? Yesterday, we talked about how you can see your entire pool by clicking this to 500. What we should see is when we open this up to 500 and we click all, you can actually see how spread out this is going to be. I think users in general will be pretty surprised to see, especially on big slates, how spread out their lineup pool is by default. You can see we didn't even get close to this, right? The fact that we don't have a single player that's even at 60% exposure to me indicates that we didn't even really need to set that setting. We probably wouldn't even have started to see the impacts of setting that setting until we set it at like at least 43 or lower in theory. But that's what it's essentially doing. It's saying that of this entire pool of 500, we're going to not build you. We're not going to use more than 60% of any one player, right? We've got a huge slate tonight, so a little bit of a different story. But it allows you to get some more natural variance to your entire lineup pool so that when you go in and start doing things like this, you know that there's going to be a lot of natural diversity in your entire lineup pool, and it's going to be easier to start crossing players off because at worst case, there's 40% or so lineups that don't have that player in it. So let's see. Let's go back to the question. I want to make sure that we are answering this question correctly. So when setting global exposure, what is a good percent to set that would give me a wide variety of player pool? I think, Giant Cobra, looking at this question, I think I would ask yourself, what are my theoretical max exposure limits in my lineups? What's the maximum I'm willing to own any one player? I use 30% often for my hitters as kind of a baseline where I like to cap things, not so much with 20 lineups, but for full 150 lineup builds, I'll use that. So, and often I will actually set this at 60, which is double 30. Again, that's kind of just a rule of thumb or like a heuristic because I don't want this to overly impact pitchers. So I'll set this there. When I'm playing golf, I'll switch over to golf. Since golf is just, it's not positional, there's, 6 golfers per lineup. That's just the way golf lineups are set up. I will actually just kind of decide how much exposure to one single golfer I am willing to get. Let me back this up to the main slate. Okay, so I may cap my exposure that I'm willing to get on a golfer. And again, rules of thumb here, but I think on the Memorial here, I have max 40% of my highest exposed golfer. For this case, again, I'll just actually set this at like 40. Because I know I'm going to cap every golfer at 40% max exposure anyway. So I'll just tell the builder, don't give me more than 40% in the entire lineup pool of anyone. When you start getting below 50%, I would say be a little careful with doing this. And I wouldn't really get much lower than like 40% probably most of the time. Without knowing what you're doing, right? You start to put some more strain on the builder by saying, don't use any player this much, and can start to potentially pull in some less optimal lineups by doing something like that. So I would say, baseline rules, if you really just want to increase the variety of your lineups while also keeping your smart diversity high, 50, 60, 70 is a good place to start with max exposure. I will say another good use case for this is if you are playing a big tournament. So let's say I was playing 150 max, right? Your smart diversity is eventually going to reach a point on a lot of these high variance sports where it's just at 10 by default. You can't make it any higher. We're using single game simulation buckets to assign projections for players. If you want to increase the diversity of your lineups further and you have smart diversity already at high, then this is a really great way to add on some additional variety to your lineup. So that's another really good way to think about it. So I guess in summary here, right, I would say good percent is going to be, well, let me start over here. Global exposure, right? We're talking about max exposure in the build settings, and it refers to your entire lineup pool, not just the 150 lineups or 20 lineups or whatever you're making, right? Good percentage to use. I would push back on that idea out of principle, and I would say make sure you just understand why you're using this, and then think about what your goals are in terms of what you want your overall lineup portfolio to look like, what you want your exposures to look like as a whole. And then wide variety of player pool, just as if I were to use smart diversity. I would never use this in place of smart diversity. I would never drop smart diversity to use max exposure instead. But if you already have a very high smart diversity and you want to just increase a little bit more variety in your lineups, it's a good place to go. So hopefully that was clear. Hopefully not too redundant. I think went pretty kind of deep into that there, but hopefully that was helpful. Let's see. Did just get a follow-up question from Big Sub here. What about adding a default exposure that's less than 100 to begin with? Maybe need a little more clarification for me there, Big Sub. I'm not exactly sure what you mean. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. So maybe just a little clarity there on what you're asking. And we'll come right back to that in a second. I'm gonna go on to my next question here because it's actually very similar. This one is from Clement Davis here in Slack, and he said, I'm trying to bring down players' exposures. It's not changing their exposures. And then I hit yes to expand the lineup pool. It's not adjusting. There's a screenshot here. Clement, I know, I think I remember seeing you having some trouble with this the other day as well. I would say, first of all, this looks like a very specific case of maybe a build that's not working so well. So if you're watching, and I'll reach out to you in case you're not after, just to make sure that someone touched base with you. Feel free to shoot us in a DM your build URL so we can take a look at that and see if there's a bug or something going on. But I want to talk about this in a general sense because I think there's some educational points to make here about what might be going wrong. And it looks like you were building lineups for yesterday's NBA slate. So that is what I'm going to run a quick build for yesterday's NBA slate. And I didn't even know they had this Friday Sat slate. That is kind of cool. I wonder if they just opened that or something, because I registered for contests last night and I didn't see it. But anyway, so I believe this is the contest we were looking at here, and it looked like you had a 150 max build. So I'm just going to assume that it was roughly default, and we'll build it here real quick. And I'll talk about a couple things I noticed just in the screenshot you sent me about things you can maybe take a look at here. So let's go ahead and look at this. I'm building 150 here because I think that the screenshot I got has a lot of yeah, it does. It does have a lot of lineups. So, and hopefully I get pretty similar looking exposures, but we'll see. Okay, so in this particular screenshot that we were looking at, the first thing that jumped out to me is that they were, so remember, this is a 2-game slate, right? There are not a lot of players in the pool. The first thing that jumped out to me is that they were fairly restrictive maximum exposure set on players that you are already getting a lot of. So I think in the screenshot, they were different players, but for players that we're getting like 80% of, there were exposures set to drop this down to like 10. And there are not going to be a lot of valid lineup constructions on slates like this. There just aren't. You're going to be fairly limited in your pool. And you can see as we start setting these down, eventually we're going to get a message that says we need to build a lineup pool in order to match your exposures, right? Continue building. I think everyone's seen this before, and we can hit yes. And we'll see what happens here. And it's going to build a chunk more lineups. So we'll let it build. You can see it ticking up over here. So we've built 70 and counting additional lineups, right? The builder's trying to fit our exposures. And let's see if this works. I think it builds 150 more by default. Yeah, so it should. Okay, it didn't work, right? We need to build more. We built 150, we still didn't build more. So the reason for this is because the builder is still building the lineups with the original projections and the build rules that you originally gave it, right? So this, we fed this a bunch of projections, and it spat out originally that it really likes Lillard, and we said, no, take away Lillard. And it said, okay, well, if you don't really want much Lillard, okay, then you got to play Jokic and LeBron. And if we set this low, then it's like, okay, well, if you're not going to play Jokic, then you got to play a ton of LeBron. And then we say, no, we don't want to do that either. Eventually, the builder's going to be like, okay, well, you got to do something, right? And when it tries to build more lineups, it's going to use the same rules you originally did. So if you are seeing that message over and over again, first of all, we'd like to take a look at the build and make sure that everything is working correctly, because there are some bugs that can come up sometimes. Where I know one that we have seen somewhat regularly is where a user has a player locked that has since been ruled out of the slate. That can be kind of tricky. You'll have a number here next to locked. It will say like 1 or 2, but you won't actually see any players in this section. It means that player has been ruled out and they're still locked into your lineups. You can refresh that and remove them just by checking and unchecking and removing all your locked players. That is definitely a bug. That's something we intend to fix, but we see that coming up pretty often. But if it's not that, right, and you're just setting some of these exposures pretty low, bump those players' projections down, right? So I think in the example that Clement gave us in Slack here, the 2 players in question were Austin Rivers and Kyle Kuzma, right? So there was, by default, 72% Austin Rivers and 64% Kyle Kuzma. Right? What I recommend is coming over here and finding those guys and bringing their projections down. So take Rivers down to, like, if you really don't want a lot of them, bring them way down, right? And it looks like, I think maybe you had already done a little bit of this, Clement. Just keep doing some more, right? So we can bring these guys down and we'll get less of them. And then even in the event that you're over here and you're moving a lot of exposures around, if you've set those projections lower, the next time we have to build 150 lineups to fit your exposures, you're not going to be given 75% Austin Rivers of your new 150 lineups because his projection was so low, right? We're not going to give him, we're not going to have him in that many lineups. So I would say that error message in general that you are need to build more lineups, if it comes up once and you hit yes and it works, you're okay. Comes up twice, 3 times, that's probably a flag that you should go back to step 1 or step 2 and take a look and maybe tweak your build settings or tweak your player projections, right? The analogy we always use is when you're building a lineup, when you're building your lineups, imagine you're building a house, right? Step 1 is your foundation. Step 2 is the construction of the lineups, right? The building of the house. And step 3 is like the quality control and dialing it in, and maybe you're painting and you're buying furniture and things like that, right? You can't, if you've got a bad foundation, no matter how you furnish that house, it's never going to be exactly what you wanted, right? If you're getting 80% of Austin Rivers out of 1,500 lineups and you don't want very much Austin Rivers, no matter what you do on the step 3, you're not going to get exactly what you were looking for, right? So in that case, go back, start with a new foundation, and see what you get there. I know going back and forth, especially maybe when you're a little short on time and running additional builds, right, kind of goes counter to what we're trying to do here with the tool overall. We want to add some tools for users to have a little bit more control over their exposures before the build, a little more flexibility with editing exposures after the build. So that's something that is on our radar as something we want to work on. But in the meantime, that is the best advice I can give. So Clement, if you watch this back, right, first DM the support team your build link so we can just take a look, because I'd like to make sure that there's nothing kind of going on that's affecting you. And second, for players that you are trying to set some of these exposures, right, if they're max exposures and you're eliminating a ton of lineups with that player, go back to step 1, drop their projection down a little bit and see if that helps. And it looks like this was for yes, at least the screenshot is for yesterday's NBA slate, so I assume this probably isn't a problem for tonight, but just something to remember in future slates. And the last point, I guess, there before we move on, right? This is a 2-game NBA slate, so remember that your options in terms of the overall lineup constructions that are valid here are just a lot lower. The builder is going to be a little bit more resilient to really aggressive exposure changes without adjusting projections, because there just aren't that many viable lineup constructions for a 2-game slate. And that's true for showdowns and smaller slates just in general, right? So just something to keep in mind. Let's see. Okay, so Big Sub got back and said floor exposure at, say, 70%. I'm sorry, man. I am having a hard time following what exactly you mean. I think that's on me. It is getting into the afternoon on Friday here. I played a lot of DFS this week, so maybe I am just having a brain fart here. But floor exposure at, say, 70%. Floor, maybe, are you talking like minimum exposure? Like how would you set a minimum exposure? Keep an eye out, wait to see what you come back with here. Instead of 100, set exposure to max 70%. Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's kind of exactly what I was referencing here. So 70% is a great kind of middle ground number of what you could set right off the bat. Using max exposure, that would be so 70%, something like that here, right? That's going to say that of the entire pool of lineups that we make, no player is going to appear in more than 70% of them. And that's going to increase some natural diversity into your lineups. I actually realized as we were talking about this that I just had a thought. One way to do this in terms of to think about the usefulness of max exposure is actually to run a test build. So let's say, just like you would normally be doing, right? We're doing a test build, and we're going to leave this at 100. Let's take a look here. We can actually then view, just like we did before, we can view our entire pool here. Let me see here. We'll let this run. Okay, so what we can do, we just saw this before, right? We can view our entire lineup pool by clicking this at 500, give this a second to readjust and pull in all those lineups. So we can actually then see how spread out the lineup pool is by default, and start there, right? So like in this case, setting a max exposure at 60 or 70% isn't even going to do anything, right? We have this already. The most we want to use Scherzer is 42%. He's the most exposed player on the slate. We have a pretty flat exposure to all players in the pool anyway, so it's not going to have a big impact. Let's go back to NBA though and compare that, just so we can see, because I think this is pretty interesting. So if we were back looking at our NBA build we just ran, and we're back here. Okay, so we're back here now. Let's reset those exposures. I'll tweak a projection here to get this message to go away. Okay, so we have a much bigger pool here. We actually have 1650. I'm just going to say the 1500. So let's look now, right? So even here, we ended up with a fairly flat range of exposures to players. I actually didn't expect that. I thought this was going to be a lot higher, to be honest. I thought this might be like there might be a certain player that the builder wanted to use aggressively. And you know what? Probably what's happening there is that's a manifestation of the smart diversity being at 10, right? So you're seeing we're already getting a ton of exposure and a ton of variety in our lineup pool. And when we come back down to 150, this is Am I crazy or is this way lower now? I swear this was just like 80, 90% Lillard, who's now way lower. I may have tweaked a setting here, potentially. I don't know what I did, but let's try this with actually a totally fresh build here. Set this at 100. I just want to see, because I know I messed around with that build a little bit. I guess the larger point I'm trying to make here is you can always run a build, run your test build, adjust your lineups to include the entire pool of lineups we made for you, and see what the overall portfolio of player exposures looks like, right? And if you have a lot of players that are 70 or 80% exposed in your entire lineup pool, then it would make a difference by adding a 50, 60, 70% max exposure in your build settings. But in this particular case, right, even for NBA on a 2-game slate, because our smart diversity is so high, the most we're even using any player is Lillard at 49%. So we're already getting a pretty flat exposure range for different players in our pool. So okay, yeah. So Big Sub, I see SaberSim can pre-program smart diversity to see what max exposure works best for each sport. Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I would say, like, so I want to think about the best way to say this. Max exposure isn't something that's likely to affect the overall expected value of your lineups. It is not something that is going to make your lineups better constructed, right? Our other build settings, we can kind of test and find optimal ranges by looking at backtesting and comparing to the expected value, because they affect the construction of the lineup itself, right? The correlation increased higher. Let's look at MLB because it's a little more useful. Correlation higher is going to create bigger, more common stacks, right? It's going to affect the construction of those lineups. Ownership fade, right, is going to emphasize lower projected owned plays on your lineups. Smart diversity, similar to max exposure, but because it's actually influencing the projections used to build the lineups, it's also going to impact the constructions of those lineups, right? So we can actually say, right, if you change these sliders around, your top score, SaberScore lineup is very much likely to change, right? If you set max exposure up or down from anywhere from like 10 to 100 even, your number one lineup, right? Your handful of lineups are not very much likely to change. This is really only going to affect the variety and the diversity of your lineups. So it shouldn't, I would think, impact your profitability over the long term, except in the way of maybe reducing your risk. So I would say this is more of an individual type question, right? Rather than where's the optimal max exposure value for a certain sport. This is more of like where is your risk tolerance for your lineups, and how wide do you want to be for your lineups. But it's an interesting idea. If anyone else on the SaberSim team is listening in here or ends up watching the recording of this, what we're talking about here is the idea of back testing and finding an optimal value for our max exposure setting on lineups. I would be curious if anyone else, especially some of the data guys, has a take on that. That's just my thoughts, right? It's not going to affect the lineup construction in the way that other settings are. So we are not likely to find an optimal value for that setting. That's the way I'm thinking about it. But Big Sub, that's actually a really great question. Thank you for asking that. I'm sorry I didn't understand at first. Ross helped me along too in a DM here. So thank you, Ross, for making my life a little easier. Because I think just failed to understand that at first read. So let's see. I don't see any other questions at the moment. If you guys have a question, it's a great time to ask. Let me see. I think there were a few. Let me see if there were any questions that came up in some other channels here. Let's see. Here's actually an interesting one. Let me actually respond. I just saw a message from Mustafa here in the general channel. Let's see here. I'm going to write a quick response to Mustafa. Okay, sorry for everyone watching live. I know that wasn't the most interesting 60 seconds there, but Mustafa sent us a question here in the general channel. I don't know if he is new to SaberSim Slack, but if he is, or Mustafa, if you have tuned in, welcome. You asked a great question here. So I just went ahead and wrote him a quick message telling him I'm going to answer this question live because I think it is a great question. So let's pull it up. We got a little extra time here. And then in the meantime, anyone watching, great time to get some other questions in the queue. If you've got questions you've been waiting to ask, pop them into YouTube chat or pop them into Office Hours Slack, and I'd be happy to talk about it here. So let's see. His question was, how do I maximize the upside of my lineups when I'm entering less lineups than the max allowed for a particular contest? For example, if I'm entering a contest with 150 max entries and I'm only entering 3 lineups, how do I make sure I get the best 3 lineups I can using the SaberSim tools? All right. Who's watched the MLB DFS course on our site, right? I think anyone that's watched it probably just had their ears tingling, right? So I'm going to start here, Mustafa, if you are watching this, and say we would generally recommend in your contest selection strategy to avoid doing that, right? I would try to stick to contests that you can afford to max out if you are going to play them. So, for example, let's say you're playing I don't even know, right? 150 lineups, 150 contests, and you're entering 3. I know a lot of people play like that. That sounds to me like entering 3 lineups into like the big GPP contest that night. So say that is $30 or something. It's $10 to enter. What we would in general recommend is you take that and instead apply that to 20 entries into the solo shot, the $1 contest, for example, that you can max out, and then 20 into the quarter jukebox or something like that you can max out. I know those prizes to first on the big GPP contests every night get people really excited. But the reason why you want to be careful doing that is because the sharpest players playing in any contest that's in the lobby are going to max it out, right? The best players playing every single contest are always going to max it out. And you are going to put yourself at a relative disadvantage against the field by not failing to max the contest out. So I would say if you are planning on applying your bankroll to any contest that you can't afford to max out, the first question that you should always ask yourself is, are there contests that have a lower entry fee that I can afford to max out, that I have parity with the field on, right? No one has more lineups than me in the contest. And that's going to have a better impact, a better ROI, long-term, better profitability playing those kinds of contests, right? So if you haven't, I mentioned the course. I highly recommend checking out our MLB DFS course. It is on our site. I've talked through this a couple times. It is under resources, strategy, under baseball, course, build a winning MLB DFS process. Where does this start, right? Why you need a process, 2 minutes, but then the first big lesson, bankroll management and contest selection, right? Most important thing. It will have massive changes on your profitability, right? And the one thing to remember here too, I think like sometimes people look at a contest like the quarter jukebox and they're like, $300 to first, like, is it really worth it? That's $5 to enter, right? The ROI on these smaller contests is insane. And if you're playing with a small bankroll and can't afford to max some of the bigger contests, it's a great place to start on some of those smaller contests that you can. And I haven't even gotten into payout structure and things like that and all the other reasons why those big contests that are 100K to first and 20K to second should be the last contest that you're entering, and only once you have a bankroll that's big enough to justify that. But with that said, I am not just going to sit here and tell you that I'm not going to answer your question, right? Because that's not totally fair. So if you are going to play those contests and you say, look, hey man, I get it. I've seen the courses, but there's, especially for these big ones, right? Like the Millie Maker's fun. I would never recommend someone, really focused in on profitability and building a bankroll to just go play the Millie Maker. But then week 1 NFL comes around and the Millie Makers are damn fun. You get a sweat, right? And you just want to play it and you want to maximize your upside. Here's a few things I would recommend. First of all, you should be matching your settings to the contest, not your pool, right? In other words, what I would not do is, let's say you're playing the big contest, it's 10K to 50K, and it's 150 max. I would start here, right? I would not, even if you're playing a single bullet, right? I would not say single entry. And the reason why is because, again, it doesn't matter what you're doing. Your lineup's going against other people in the contest that are maxing that thing out, and they've got 150 lineups, and they're going to take serious, aggressive stands with ownership. They're going to pick some really low on plays. They're going to pick really high upside plays, and you're competing with those lineups. And when you drop your entry limit down to single entry or 3 max to actually represent what you're playing, you are giving up some ownership fade. You are giving up some upside and smart diversity. So keep these slider settings set at the actual contest that you're going to play, right? From there, I would say, it's a whole world of strategy to talk about, right? You have a lot of the things we always talk about, right? Updating projections, running a test build, tweaking your exposures. I would say the best place to start there is watch the rest of the course, because that's going to kind of give you a good start in terms of just, let me look at your question again. How to maximize the upside of your lineups, right? I think I would start by going back through that course and looking at some of the things there. But the internal question here, I would say, is, be careful doing that. If your focus is really on trying to grow the bankroll and maximize your ROI, I would recommend trying to avoid doing that kind of thing. So, Mustafa, I don't know if you managed to catch this. I know I probably just popped this on you. I realized this message now was sent 40 minutes ago in the general channel, so it might be your very first day here in SaberSim. So hopefully you appreciate the personal welcome from yours truly. I will go ahead, when I get this recording up, at the very least send you a timestamped link to make sure that you have a chance to actually get your question answered. And welcome to SaberSim, right? This is how we do things here. We like to talk. I like to talk, right? I'm sure you guys realize that now. We like to dive deep into some of these questions and explain the why and really talk through things. So happy to provide some more follow-up to that too, if any of that wasn't confusing, or if I didn't really explain why we want to avoid failing to max a contest out as opposed to just playing a smaller contest we can max out. So anyway, let's see. Big Soup said the lower dollar amount contests sometimes have higher scores that take down the contest versus the big contest, not to mention a ton more entries to compete with to win the lower stakes contest. So do you really need to max enter, even though that's the rule of thumb? So that is a good point. And I think the reason why, just straight up most of the time, is that you'll see that the smaller dollar contests are just bigger, right? Like the mini max will have like 42,000 entries, sometimes 35,000 entries, and the main GPP that night will just be a little bit smaller. So the top score, the number one score, is likely to be a little bit higher in the lower entry contests. Don't get me wrong. I don't think the mini-max is an easy contest, right? And that's not exactly, if you go back and watch that that course, that's not exactly the contest we're encouraging you to play, right? We like to think about things, I guess while we're on the subject, we like to think about things through the lens of effective entrance, right? So that's not the total number of lineups in the pool. That's the total number of lineups divided by the max entry limit for any one player. And that kind of gives you, the higher that number is, the easier the contest is going to be to beat. So let's just pull up the DraftKings lobby, right? Let's talk about this, because I don't see any other questions that have come in. So again, I'm going to talk about this here for a few more minutes, or 10 minutes if no other questions come in, but there's 22 minutes on this subject here on our course. So that is the better place to start. But let's just look at tonight's slate and let's see. Let's go ahead and start looking at the big prizes. So we have this $18 50K to first, right? This is 16K entries, and the mini max. Oh, I just realized I'm not sharing my screen because I'm on the wrong tab. Sorry about that here. Okay, here's DraftKings. So what we are looking at, right, the $18 big GPP versus the Minimax, right? The Minimax has twice as many entries. The top lineup in this contest is probably most nights going to be bigger, just out of like pure variance, right? Like the odds of somebody getting closer to that optimal are just higher in the contest that's bigger. One thing that you can notice, and a trend that I think is fairly consistent, is that the higher the dollar amount, the higher the cash line is, the min cash line. I know that's not a metric that we shoot for. We don't build lineups to min cash, but it does provide some evidence that the overall field is actually sharper in the higher dollar contest. They are building better lineups that, as a group, as a whole, push the min cash line higher. But just out of sheer variance with more chances to do it, right? The smaller dollar contests are more likely to come up with that lineup that's closer to the optimal, that has the higher score. But just looking at this, right? Let's see. The equation that I talked about was the number of total lineups in the contest. So in the bat flip, for example, 16,300 or 16,300 divided by 150, right? It's 150 max, is only 109, little under 109, right? That means there's theoretically 109 people could just come in and just max this out. Now, there's going to be a ton of people just throwing in an entry, throwing in 2, throwing in 3. But then we see Hog Lawrence, right? It's a sharp player. He has 150. We just start looking through this. So 2 entries, 3 entries, 3 entries, 2 entries, 25. You see people start to get up here at 25, and we keep going. But if you start looking, the whistles go woo, 150 entrants. Really sharp player, right? Ricky D, sharp player. Bro, sharp player. Right? I don't know Epi. I assume he's sharp. Who are the players that are maxing the contest out, right? This is basically the point I'm trying to make, is that the percentage of players that are likely to max the contest out are sharp. And maybe you're sharp. Maybe you're just as sharp as these guys. But if you've only got 3 lineups to their 150, to all of their 150s, all of these sharp players, you're going to be at a serious disadvantage. And when you come down to this mini-max, right, again, this isn't even a lineup this isn't even a contest that I would emphasize playing, because it's not that much better, but it's at least twice as better. At worst, you've got an even shot in terms of your parity of the lineups that you can take up in the field compared to the other sharp players. It's still true down here, right? More players can max this 150, but you still see it's still the same trends. There's plenty of players playing 1 or 2. The sharpest players are the ones that are maxing this out. So you're still competing. The greatest percentage of sharp players, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm getting a little excited. I love talking contest selection, if you can't tell. The sharpest players in this contest are going to be the ones that max it out. So I wonder, sharpshooter, don't recognize his name, but there's even a few of these like low stakes grinders down here that you'll just see, especially once you start playing a lot of these that are just in everything, and it feels like they win a lot because they're maxing all these things out, and they're sharp. They're good players. So the contest we emphasize players playing is stay under the $3 range if you have access to it, and play contests where the effective entrance is 1,000 or more. So if we look at this daily dollar, right? Yeah, this is only 200 to first, but there's 2,378 people in this contest. And you can see, right, there's, 2,378 effective entrants compared to the Minimax, which has like 250 something effective entrants. 250 could come in and people and max this out. There's probably at least 100 or so really sharp players at the low stakes that are going to be maxing this contest out. Whereas you're going to get a lot of fishy players in the daily dollar, and the field is just going to be overall softer. So that's kind of would be my general answer to you there, Big Sub. I know you might look, and again, the point being here, the Minimax, the original message behind what I said originally here is not that you should just rush to go play the Minimax, because I think those are also really sharp contests that I think people just say, play $3 and under and you're good to go and max it out. Those are still sharp. Those aren't easy contests to win, but they're probably easier than the big GPP that night if you're not maxing it out. Right? So, And also the one other thing, I guess, while we still have a few minutes here, I haven't seen any other questions come in, that you'll see is that the payout, when we start talking about payout structures, right? The payout structure, even on a contest like the Minimax, is going to be a lot more friendly. So yeah, if you go nuts and you just hit the total nuts, you build something close to the optimal and just have a great lineup, maybe it might have taken you a little bit further in a smaller overall contest. But that contest also is just going to have really sharp a really sharp cliff on the. So you can see this is 20% to first, 40% to the top 10, only 1.67 min cash, right? It's going to fall right off a cliff. Whereas the Minimax, again, not my favorite contest. I feel like I'm talking about the Minimax too much for how little I play it, really. But you can see 10% to first versus a little under 25% to the top 10. It's just going to be a lot more, what's the right word for that? I don't know. Friendly on your bankroll when you get close, but don't get all the way there with a lineup. So anyway, that is like 6 minutes of me trying to summarize a really awesome 22-minute video that we have here on our site. So please watch this if you haven't already. Again, if you're looking for a sweat and you want to throw a few lineups in a big GPP, I get it. I do that sometimes too, especially on this big stuff. My best recommendation is use the slider settings and build lineups that are built for the contest you're in, not just like the lineup settings of what you're using, right? Sometimes people ask, if I'm only throwing a single bullet in, should I use single entry settings? I would say no. Play to the contest that you're playing it in, but just realize that for your long-term ROI profitability, it's not the way we would recommend doing your contest selection. So, I think we are just about caught up here. We've only got a few minutes left. Any other questions before we head into the weekend here for me? It's another great show today. Thank you all so much for everyone that has been joining this and helping to make this a success. It's been fun so far. I think we've gotten some good feedback. Again, I'll kind of say a few of the same notes I've been saying over and over again. First of all, whether you're watching this live or you're watching the recording, thank you. I know we have a huge audience that we're reaching on the recordings on YouTube. So thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you have questions for us and you want us to answer them on office hours, you can ask in our office hours channel on Slack at any hour of the day. I always go back through and make sure I've caught up with all the questions and answer them here on stream. You can also just go ahead and email us at support@sabersim.com. We are taking good questions from support that we think would be useful for others to hear and answering them live on stream. But if you have a specific question, no matter what it is that you'd like for us to tackle on stream, just let us know in your email and we will get to it. If you are watching these on YouTube and you are not in our Slack channel and you want to get in, email us at support@sabersim.com. We will get you in there if you are a premium SaberSim subscriber. And if you are watching these on YouTube and you are not on the SaberSim team, we have a 7-day free trial on our site, sabersim.com. Come check it out. These office hours are just a piece of the puzzle here, right? We've got a great community. We've got a great product. Hopefully I've been able to show that off a little bit. Come check us out. 7-day free trial. No harm, no foul if it's not for you. But come be a part of the team here. So with all that said, I hope you guys have a great weekend. Hope you enjoy some of these awesome NBA and NHL too has been awesome. I actually have really just gotten into NHL this season, but I've been watching some of those games. They've been really, really exciting games. Just hopefully you guys keep enjoying some of this playoff sports. We're right in the middle of getting into the heat of the baseball season. Great time to be a DFS player and a sports fan. So enjoy it all. We will be back here again Monday afternoon, 2 p.m. Eastern. Again, Monday through Friday, we'll be rocking these office hours. And then on Thursday next week, we'll have our next strategy session. Topic to be decided. If you have ideas of what would make for a good topic, please let us know. And I will see you guys all then. Thank you and have a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.